Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, but today it is filled not only with bread, but also with blood, because of Russia and their war in Ukraine. It is not for the first time that we suffer from their invasion and aggression, and that Ukrainian village is targeted. And it is not for the first time that we will win in this war, because despite the minefields, Ukrainian farmers in bulletproof vests continue sowing the grain. Ukraine is an agricultural country, but it has not always been like that. We were occupied for centuries, and many Ukrainians were forced out of cities. Cities were Russified. And people in the villages did not have normal access to education, they did not choose many different professions, and they were limited in their travel. At the beginning of the Soviet Union occupation, 86% of Ukrainian population lived in the villages. And many of severe, bloody Russian repressions were actually targeted at the Ukrainian village. And we may say that the history of Ukrainian villages in the 20th century is very tragic. And today I will explain you why. At the end of 20s, in the middle of 30s, Stalin's terror started in Ukrainian villages in the form of dekolekization. We described this process in one of our previous episodes, but I will remind you that it was targeted at prosperous Ukrainian peasants, which shaped the middle class. They were erased from the face of Ukraine, and all of their property was collectivized. Dekolekization resulted in Holodomor, in repressions, and in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians deported to depressive Russian regions. And exactly after dekolekization, another process started known as collectivization. We can substitute it with the words slavery or serfdom, and we won't make a mistake. Actually, serfdom was abolished in Austro-Hungarian Empire and even in Russian Empire at the end of the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, but it returned back to Ukraine and many other Soviet republics exactly during the Stalin's rule. Collectivization meant that new collective farms appeared, known as kolkhozы in Russian and in Ukrainian languages. This is a collective agricultural cooperative where actually nothing belonged to anyone. And you know, when nothing belongs to anyone, you can never get respect and order. Some villages that were small and people wanted to live there disappeared because the state wanted to build big villages. So, for example, if you live in a small village, very quickly the school is closed, the bus stops driving to your station, and slowly people come and start destroying some of the buildings, rebuilding them, and inviting you that way to larger villages. In the larger villages, the main organization, the only place of work, was the very same collective farm, kolkhoz. So let us look more clearly at what that was and how was life of peasants on a collective farm. Imagine one morning you wake up and everything that belonged to you and your family for generations, starting with your land and finishing with cows or goats or even apples that grow in your garden, all of that now belongs to the USSR. And you can continue working on the land, but only as the part of kolkhoz, collective farm. Another very problematic thing that perhaps could have added to the depression of a person is that you don't have a choice where to work. You live in the village and you work on a collective farm. You cannot choose a profession, you can only choose a number of tasks that you are going to perform during the day. Your work is measured in labor days, and the things you get for your work also depend on the number of labor days that you do. Soviet Union liked to depict itself as a very modern industrialized state. But actually the majority of works in the fields, in the farms, were performed manually. That's why people felt and looked really bad, because of poor working conditions. Collective farms could specialize on something. You could work with the cattle, for example, or to grow grains or apples, but very often they were a mixture of different traditional village works. You could participate in various social competitions to be known, for example, as the best milk lady of the district, but at the same time, up to 1966, you would not earn salary. Yes, peasants working in collective farms did not receive money until 1966. What they received were the products that they grown previously during the year, and for example the number of products were somehow divided to the number of labor days that the person worked, and he or she would receive a certain amount of, I don't know, beetroot, milk, or whatever. And only in 1966 peasants started earning money. And the first salary at the collective farm was 12 rubles. Compare it to the average salary of a person in the USSR, that was 96. This is how Soviet Union treated peasants, and peasants were the majority of the USSR. It goes without saying that the very start of this process, the very start of collectivization, was negative, and many people tried to escape it and move out of the villages. And to prevent that, at the very beginning of its history, Soviet Union forbid peasants to travel freely, and they did not have passports. In the USSR, you needed passport if you wanted to study, to travel, to vote. And people who live in the villages started receiving Soviet passports in 1974. Before that, it was total serfdom. For example, for a person from a village to be able to travel to the city, he or she had to ask for a permission from the head of kolkhoz, the collective farm, or from the head of the village. So they were not free to travel. They were not free to enter universities and, for example, build a different career that their parents had in kolkhoz. Only in 1974, people in villages received passports, and to some extent, it is only then they became full citizens of the USSR. But not having private property is always bad. When nothing belongs to anyone, people rarely care about that. So, despite that demonstrated success of collective farms, there were huge problems. Stealing and looting came with the culture of collective farms. Because if it's not yours or somebody else's, why not take it home? The decay of the USSR led to the decay of collective farms, or maybe vice versa. People started destroying, deconstructing farms, and many of them look very depressive in the landscapes of post-Soviet, ex-Soviet republics. My name is Anna, and I'm a Ukrainian. So you can consider me subjective during these dark times of Russian invasion. But to be objective, Google some photos of modern Ukrainian villages and compare them to modern Russian villages. Russian without war sometimes look abandoned, devastated, destroyed, with no harvest on the field and drowned people close to their houses. Ukrainian villages, even those that were destroyed by Russian soldiers during long or short period of occupation, quickly rebuild themselves. New gardens appear, people plant flowers to make even the bombed yards look better. And this tells a lot about us. We will win this war, and once again we will be a warm and happy breadbasket of Europe, hopefully in the joint European family. And Russia with its evil and in its modern format will disappear and change its attitude to the world.